Okay, good morning. Thank you for coming today. My topic today is lifestyle of generosity. I think that being that it's Christmas season, uh, it's considered to be the season of joy and giving, right? And I I really enjoy that aspect of Christmas in that it can be kind of easy to get caught up in the spirit of being generous and wishing that maybe we could be more that way all year round. But at least once a year is not a bad thing. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in um, living life kind of centered on me, what I want, what I don't want, what I like, what I dislike, what I enjoy, what I don't enjoy, these kind of things. You know, it can become easy to get wrapped up in a life centered around what I want or what I don't want. And seeking our comforts and pleasures, making my life more convenient, even maybe sometimes even at the expense of others. And the problem with that is that inevitably this way of life and this way of thinking always ends up leading to deep sense of dissatisfaction and unhappiness in life. And it's ironic because we seek for what we want, but in the process we end up unhappy. And I believe that that's because God didn't wire us to live centered on ourselves. I believe that God wired us to live a bigger life. We are wired to experience joy through living a life of generosity. That's why I titled the sermon this way. So I'd like to start off with a quote from the Divine Principle. The ultimate purpose of the universe, with human beings at its center, is to return joy to God. All entities have dual purposes. As was explained earlier, every entity has dual centers of movement, one of internal nature and another of external form. These centers pursue corresponding purposes for the sake of the whole and for the sake of the individual, whose relationship is the same as that between internal nature and external form. In God's ideal, there cannot be any individual purpose which does not support the whole purpose, nor can there be any whole purpose that does not guarantee the interests of the individual. The infinite variety of beings in the universe form one vast organic body interwoven by these dual purposes. So a few years ago, and some of you may remember this situation, we had kind of a relative of a church member who was traveling through and no, I'm sorry. This was a while ago. So they were a couple, boyfriend and girlfriend, and she was pregnant, but like only 3 or 4 months or something like that. 6, 7? Okay, thank you. And she was traveling through Colorado on her way to somewhere else. And all of a sudden she had some kind of bleeding. Something happened. And she rushed to one of our hospitals, this, intense hospitals for babies, preemie babies, and they were able to birth the baby. But the baby was so premature that the baby had to stay at the hospital for like 3 months or something like that before it could be let off life support and take home. So this young lady was kind of stuck in the situation where she had to stay here for the baby, but she didn't have any family or anybody like this. And so we get an email because her boyfriend is related to a church member in Washington, some kind of a loose connection, a friend of a friend of a friend kind of thing. And they were like, is there any way you can help this? Boyfriend came out and they were living at a hotel and everything. And it was a difficult situation. They didn't have any money and they were going to get kicked out of the hotel. So they were like, what can you guys help somehow? And we were like, okay, we'll see what we can do. And then one of our members offered to pay for another 2 weeks or so at the hotel. And I thought, wow, that's a big deal. Hotels in Denver are not cheap, 2 weeks, minimum $60, $70, $80 a night, at a cheap motel these days. That was a big contribution. Later on, of course, it couldn't keep doing that, so they ended up living with us. That was interesting. And just another one of those stories. This was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. But I was really touched by the fact that one of our members would be willing to put himself out that kind of money to support this family that we barely had any connection with. I just felt that was very generous. And so I remember I was driving home with a friend, and we were talking about, I was just like, oh, I think this, I was just talking about how I thought this thing was really generous, and I was really inspired. And most of the community didn't even, this wasn't broadcast. People don't know about this so much. And his response to me was a big surprise. He said, well, he has money, so that's why he could help. He could be generous. The idea was that he was generous because he had money to spare. And I didn't know what to say. But inside, I was deeply offended by that statement because, most of the time, maybe you can relate, I think you can, when we try to be generous with people, when we try to help someone in need, whether it's with money or with our time or with our energy or whatever, it's not because we have a bunch of those things lying around, because I have a bunch of extra money and I don't know what to do with it, so I'm just going to help this person. Or I have a bunch of time, or I have a bunch of energy. Most of us, we use our time and our energy and our money, or we have uses for it. And it's not like we have a bunch sitting around that we could just use for something when the need arises. I think it's important to give credit where credit is due, and people act out of their generosity and their desire to help. It's even though they have a busy life, even though they're tired, maybe you didn't get a good sleep, maybe you've got a lot on your plate, and even still, maybe your budget's very tight, but even still, you want to help where you can. That is the heart of generosity that I feel is really important. Not because we have a bunch, but because each human being has a desire to want to be generous. That's been my experience in life. Everybody has a desire to be generous. It doesn't always express itself in the same way, but it's there. But, at the same time, to some degree, he's right. You can't give money to help somebody if you don't have any money. If you don't have time, you can't give time very easily. If you don't have energy and you're just completely at rock bottom, it's hard. Hard to be generous when you have little. But I think that it really misses the point of what it means to be generous. And in some ways, this is summed up in this verse in the Bible from Mark, where Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. And I guess that was obvious to everybody. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions, for they gave a tiny part of their surplus. But she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on. So generosity doesn't usually come from abundance, and I would go on a limb to say that generosity is really demonstrated in its trueness, or its realness, or its authenticity, when it's coming from a place of when there maybe scarcity is not the best word, but when we don't have a lot to offer, but we offer what we can. When we haven't had enough sleep, when we're tired, when money is tight, when we're overworked or discouraged, these are the times when we see often our true selves, the quality of our character. We can call it living for the sake of others. We can call it philanthropy. We can call it altruism. But it's not about the thing itself. It's not about the amount of money, but it's about doing what we can in that opportunity, in that experience, prioritizing another over our own needs from time to time. When I was a child, my parents, they really wanted me to have a good school experience, as good as possible. And so I grew up in Casper, Wyoming. If you know anything about Casper, Wyoming, we didn't have a lot of options for school. And basically, my parents had the option to put us in a public school or like a Catholic or private school. And I wasn't a part of the decision-making process, obviously, but my parents decided to put me into Catholic school. And I know enough, I don't know the details, but I know enough to know that my parents, it was hard for them to spend the money for me to go to a religious school. It would have been much easier for them for me to have gone to the public school, which would have been free. But my parents really wanted me to have that kind of a experience growing up. And, we never had like direct conversations like, oh, how much does it cost to send me to this school? Or like, are we doing okay? We didn't talk about that so much. But I do know that it was a challenge for them. And that's something that's probably something that we'll never fully talk about. But it made a big imprint on my life because my parents decided that even though it was a sacrifice for them and maybe they couldn't have the money to do other things that they'd like to do, they wanted to make that investment for me. And that made a very deep imprint on me, that even though when I was going through my challenges of my teen years and being, rebellious and, a couple weeks ago I shared, one of my big regrets is that I bullied a lot of kids, these kind of things. I had this imprint on me that my life is important. I have to be wise and careful about how I choose to live my life. And I think that came out more later in my life. Now, as an adult and having kids around that same age, it's interesting how things go full circle. Me and my dad were talking about this a few weeks ago. Now, Adonia, she has Heartland Academy, but she's not able to offer a middle school at this time. So as my kids got older, the twins needed a different school to go to. So the only other Acton school in Denver is a Christian Acton school. And it's about a 40-minute drive each way. So 4 times a day I'm making that drive. Plus it costs money. It's not cheap. It's not super expensive, but it's not cheap. It's a private school. So I've been reflecting on this, how I have the opportunity now as a parent myself to kind of turn around and offer that same token of generosity or desire for my kids to have as good of a start in life as I can provide for them. By doing the same thing my parents did and putting them in a school, a Christian private school, and they're having a really good time. They've made new friends, and they have goals, and they have kind of reward system for doing certain things. Some of them are optional, like if they memorize certain books of the Bible. And so it's been interesting sometimes when we're driving home, they're reciting Bible verses, trying to memorize them so they can get all the points and get their benefits and things. And I remember doing that in high school too. And so it's interesting how things can come full circle, and we have opportunities to be able to take the generosity I was impart it into us and then pass it on to someone else. It could be another generation. It could just be a friend or a family member. But I found that to be very meaningful. I feel it's kind of a privilege, like to be able to take what was done for you that made a difference in your life and then to be able to pass it on to somebody else. There's something fundamentally really good about that. And anyway, I'm just happy about it. This is a time of year where it's a good opportunity to reflect on how much generosity am I intentionally practicing in my life right now. Because I really believe generosity is it's a intentional decision. It's not just like, I mean, sometimes maybe you wake up in the morning and you feel generous. Oh, I'm just going to be really generous today. But my experience is that doesn't happen very often. And maybe it's different for you. Maybe you wake up every day like that. But I find that it really comes down to an intention, like a decision. Because naturally, we focus on my needs. I'm hungry, I don't feel like I'm being cared for enough, or I've got this stress or this challenge I'm dealing with. And so life kind of comes at us, and our natural reaction is to try to conserve and try to protect ourselves and make our way in life through all the difficulties that we have to deal with. It's actually not easy to set those things aside and think about others. It's not an easy thing to do at all. But like I said before, practicing generosity in our life is a big part of how much fulfillment, happiness, joy we experience in our life. If we spend our whole life just focusing on my needs, we end up very unhappy. So generosity can be expressed in so many different ways. It's with all the important people in our life, our family members, our children, our parents, our spouse, our friends, our coworkers. And it could be, many times it's little things too. You know, giving people the benefit of the doubt, waiting to pass judgment, not assuming things about people, but allowing them the time to make a real relationship with somebody instead of just judging them from first glance or first impressions. That's an aspect of generosity because it's easier, less work for us to just make assumptions about people. But to actually give people a chance and give the opportunity, or maybe they made a mistake, but to give them the opportunity to make amends, we don't have to. That's more work. That's trust. That's opening up ourselves to the opportunity to be disappointed again. That, in order to do those things, requires a certain amount of generosity. Sharing your skills and your talents is a way of being generous. We tend to develop skills and talents so that we can progress in life, so that we can be successful in life. But then turning around and being like, I have this skill, I have this talent. Maybe I could use it to benefit somebody or something. Even something as simple as listening well is an act of generosity, in my experience. If you've ever had the experience of talking with somebody and you see a glazed look in their eyes and you know they're really not listening. But if you've ever been in a conversation where that person, they were at the edge of their seat, they wanted to hear everything you had to say, they were taking in everything, they wanted to know and understand where you were coming from. That's a very different kind of conversation. And in my experience, you're actually giving something to somebody when you do that. That's generous because it can be easy, even in a conversation, we assume we know what they're talking about. And we kind of stop listening. We're like, somewhere deep inside, I'm like, oh, I don't really need to know any of this. I've done it. I've done it many times. I'm actively working on not doing that because it really bothers me when I have a conversation with somebody and a few minutes later I'm like, oh my God, I don't remember a thing that we talked about. That doesn't seem right. What's the point? Is that a conversation for the sake of conversation? So even something as simple as having a conversation there can be an intention there. There can be a giving and receiving. There can be a generosity offered to another human being or not. It's completely up to you, up to me, how we decide to approach that, how we decide to live our life. When we share generosity with others, it says that I'm more interested in what you have to say, like in a conversation, than what I have to say or what I think about what you said. That's not actually an easy thing to do. And I think that maybe many of you can relate that we often catch ourselves not doing that, not being generous in our conversations. Generosity is a lifestyle and a decision. One person told me once, and I might not remember exactly what he said, but he said that he made a decision that whenever his child had a serious question, especially about God or truth, he said, I made a decision. I'm going to stop whatever I'm doing, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to put all my attention on that conversation. And I thought to myself, that's really a deep thing, actually, because I think a lot of us, we don't think about that. I many times don't think about that, and I hope that if my child comes to me with a question, or if we're having if I'm having a conversation with one of you or somebody or whatever, that in that moment that I will make, I'll have the intention and I'll be in a space where I want to, have that conversation. But the reality is, most people live busy lives, and so to actually have the decision made ahead of time that when this situation arises, I'm going to stop what I'm doing and I'm just going to focus on that person. I thought that was actually really cool, a really cool decision that, maybe, something I could take to heart more, that I could do more. Because for sure, sometimes when I have a conversation with one of my kids or whatever, I'm still thinking about the other thing that I was, or that I was doing or that I was thinking about. So to be intentional, to be present in the moment, I thought that was really cool. And I think that's also because if we kind of approach life dealing with situations with the hope that in that moment I'll feel generous, then I'd say most likely you're probably not going to feel too generous in that moment. You might, but I find that there's so many things on my mind at any given moment, and it's hard to sometimes focus in on the present in the moment. I've tried living a selfish life. I've tried living that life where I just play video games all day long, or I watch anime all day long, or I just do my thing. And it's kind of cool for a while. You know how some people, their dream job is to play video games all day long, right? It's kind of cool for a while. But eventually, you feel really empty. And you become filled with a lot of regret of what that time could have been used for, or what relationships could have been developed instead. And so you don't have to take my advice or my life experience, but it wouldn't be a bad thing if you did. This is a quote from our founder, Reverend Moon. He said, "All of our lives are limited, whether that limit is 60 years, 70 years, or some other time period. Depending on how we use that time, we can live a life that is 2 or 3 times more abundant than others. If you cut your time into segments and then live each segment in a meaningful way, your life will be truly precious. Live your life with an attitude of devotion and diligence, telling yourself, for example, that you will plant 2 or 3 trees in the time it takes others to plant 1. Do not live for yourself. You must live not for yourself, but for others, not for your family, but for your neighbors, not for your own country, but for the world. All sin in the world comes about when the individual is put first. Individual desires and ambitions harm a person's neighbors, and ruin the society at large. It's not supposed to be there. And Albert Einstein also said, "Only a life lived for others is a life worthwhile." So I believe that generosity it's something that's within each of us, whether we put a lot of intention or practice into it or not, because it's something that comes directly from God. It's that aspect that comes from God, from the God who wanted to create this world and wanted to create this universe because he wanted to experience not just himself, but something greater than himself. He wanted an equal, an object to be able to give love to and to receive love from in a natural and authentic way. So he devoted all those billions of years to creating the universe and the perfect environment for his children to grow up in. And even after we turned our backs on him, he continues to pour out his heart into us. So it's built into each and every single one of us. And when we practice generosity and when we mold ourselves to become generous people, we're actually coming closer to God. We're actually becoming more like God. We're creating more affinity, more common base that God can be a part of our life. Because that is how God exists. And that's how God created us to be. And by practicing generosity, we show what's important in our life. We can say that something is important to me, but it's only when you put real intention or effort into something that you can really see what's important to us. And it's when we put generosity into practice, then we see what is worth my time, my energy, and my money. So Christmas is often, like I said, called the season of joy and giving. And it's at this time I would like to, for you to consider, how can each of us, how can you practice and make the decision to be generous in our life, with the people in our lives, or with something that maybe you would like to make a bigger difference in, something that's bigger than ourselves. So I'd like to finish with a couple quotes. This is from our true Father. He said, "Nothing exists for its own sake. That is not how God created the world. Man exists for the sake of woman, and woman exists for the sake of man. Nature exists for the sake of humanity. Humanity exists for the sake of nature. All created beings in this world exist for the sake of their counterparts. It is an axiom of heaven that every being lives for the sake of its partner. To realize that we exist for the sake of others is the great achievement that changes our lives. When we realize that our life is not ours alone, but is meant to be for the sake of the other, we begin to follow a path different from the one we are on. Even the smallest and most trivial thing can bring you happiness when you do it for another." And then lastly, an African proverb: "If you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together." Please join me in prayer. Dearest Heavenly Parent, good morning. Thank you for creating this family, Heavenly Parent, here where we can support one another and we can walk this journey of life together. Heavenly Parent, it's not always easy. In fact, often it's very hard. And sometimes it feels like it was easier to be alone and not have to support or rely on others, Heavenly Parent. But we know that you instilled into us a desire to be a part of something bigger. You instilled into us a desire to share our what we have for the benefit of others, Heavenly Parent. And especially at this time of Christmas, where we remember your Son, Jesus, who willingly and gladly shared his life with all your children. And he made that sacrifice and he lived for us, Heavenly Parent. I pray that we can take some of that into our own life and make our own determination of how we're going to live our life, Heavenly Parent, no matter where we're at in our life right now. What I can offer out of, not because I should or because I must, but because each of us has that desire to want to do something and to give something and to be a part of something, Heavenly Parent. And I just pray that you can touch that part within each and every one of us, Heavenly Parent, that we can express our generosity to the people in our lives. Many people, Heavenly Parent, desperately needing to experience generosity in their life, Heavenly Parent. In a world where so many people use one another, and in a world where so many people live for their own sake and for their own well-being, Heavenly Parent, I pray that we can join the many people in this world who are trying to live like you, who are trying to inherit your nature and be a part of making this world a better place, Heavenly Parent. Be a part of expressing generosity and love to the people in our lives, Heavenly Parent. And I pray that we can start by practicing that in our own lives. At this time, we can make determinations. We can make a decision now that I'm going to be a generous person. I'm going to live like you. I'm going to live like our true parents and Jesus did before them, Heavenly Parent. I thank you for these precious children who have all gathered here this morning, and I pray and hope that this message could have been meaningful to each and every one of us. I offer this prayer in my name, Michael and Donia Hendrick, a Blessed Center family. Amen and adieu. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Mike.